Welcome to another Dawn and Julia Create. So it's my turn to set the challenge this time, and I have asked Dawn and I to do some reverse colouring. That's not quite what I mean, but rather the trend that is all over YouTube right now, which is a reverse colouring book where the colour is already laid out and you draw in the lines yourself. Now I have to say, watching those videos, I was tempted to jump on Amazon and order myself a book, but the one reason I didn't was because of this. I have piles, and maybe you do too, of background papers, mop-ups, things that we do whilst we're crafting, which is essentially the same thing. Colour already in the page, waiting for us to look at it, see what we see in there, and start doodling our own drawings and artwork. So today, that is exactly what we're going to do. Use up our backgrounds and use it to do some reverse colouring. The first thing I did is to go through all the backgrounds, and boy, that was a trip down memory lane, looking at all the swatching I'd done. I actually think one of those pictures there was a background I made in a previous Dawn and Julia Create. So having a look through all of this, which was fun. I also just have to apologise for the lighting. I promise that dodgy lighting is not like that all the way through the video. When I was actually filming, it looked great, but somehow when you bring it into the editing suite, not so much. Oh, look, there's the papers from the first Curious Wonders collection. Oh, anyway, I choose these few papers and decide to start with this one. So I believe this one was a gel press print using some MDF pieces. And it seemed quite simple to do. There was a few circles down the side that were part of the relief from when I did the jelly print. And I thought they could make some very quirky flowers. Flowers are a great place to start. They do not have to look realistic, and with a few simple shapes like circles and teardrops, you can make a very quirky, pretty fantasy flower. So that is where I started, just to try and get into the flow of it a little bit. Now, I do appreciate that a lot of you may feel, well, you're an artist, you can draw, so it's okay for you. Believe me, I was bricking it. Mostly because when it comes to drawing, yes, I do draw, but I create a lot of dodgy drawings before I come out with anything decent. I draw in my sketch pad with my pencil and an eraser. Most of my drawings have a lot of eraser, or I do it in Procreate where there is an undo button. So sitting there putting ink to paper without having sketched out first, I did find it a little bit nervous. I would suggest just breathe, take your time, go with the flow, and it'll be all right. At the end of the day, it's just a bit of paper. So if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world. If you don't want to throw out the bit of paper, there's always gesso, and it can be used for something else. So I am just taking my time. A lot of the extra doodles that I've put in was me sort of buying myself a little bit of time so that I could decide what to do. And yeah, actually a lot of those details are what made it. So like the little black and white stripe, that was me sort of thinking, right, what to do next. Well, while I'm deciding, I'll just put in a few little stripes, and actually those details made it. So that is kind of what I would recommend. Just sort of add a little doodle in. If you create a shape that you didn't like, that's okay. Just add a few more lines, a few more doodles within it, a few circles, and it's amazing how it can lift it and make it look so different. Now, obviously this is part of the Dawn and Julia Create now, and Dawn and I like to guess what each other will do, and normally we're pretty close. Occasionally we get it wrong, but in general we're pretty good. I'm sure if it ever came to a crafting sort of almost like Mr. and Mrs. style game, Dawn and I would win hands down if it came to sort of what would each other do. This one, not so much, because I've never seen her do anything like this, so I don't know how she's going to approach it. I know when I mentioned it to Dawn, she was like, oh yeah, I've seen reverse colouring, and she was sort of thinking the same thing, that we could do a crafter's version with the backing papers that we had. So we both sort of had that idea on our radar, which was cool. We do tend to think alike, but what she will actually do with it, I don't know.
So I can't wait to see. I think she might use the chisel nib of her pen and do some little marks within it. But other than that, I really don't know. So this was me just using my Pro Marker, filling in some of the bits and pieces so that it stood out a little bit more. And even though this was not a card or a journal piece, I still find myself needing to edge it like it was to sort of make that frame and draw the eye in. I did decide just to sort of leave this where it is. At one point I was sort of contemplating using those sort of white splodgy bits or bits that haven't quite got colour on them and making clouds and making a full scene, but I also didn't feel that. I just thought I actually really like where it is just now and decided just to leave it as is. I did end up adding these leaves. Once I added lines into the first one, I was like, oh, actually, that looks really good. So then I went and added 2 more because I like to do things with the rule of 3s. And that was that one done. So this one was slightly more abstract. I struggled with it a little bit in that this was a mop-up page of one of my stencils. So I knew what it should be. It should be roses and geometrics and hearts. So trying to look at it and see something else, I struggled with it. And then all I could see was an apple. And then once I drew one apple, I was like, oh, great, it's an apple. Now what? So it was like, I don't know what else to do. So then I turned the other rose shapes into apples too. So then I had 3 apples and then didn't know what to do. So this sort of did take a little bit more time just to sort of go with the flow. And what I've learned from this is not to overthink it. You don't actually have to create a picture that made sense. So I drew in the apples. And then I sort of drew those sort of wiggly squiggly lines that almost look like oak leaves, which kind of work with apples because it's kind of autumnal. But I was just sort of drawing around the paint lines for that, to be honest. And as I was doing it, sort of realised it doesn't need to make sense. And it still looks really good. We're just creating a pattern. So it's a pattern of sort of loose organic shapes and then geometrics, which actually I quite like. I quite like doing stencils that do things like that. So it's a different way of working and it being inspired. And when I think about it, one of the first videos that I watched was Chloe Rose Art. And when she did it, she was just sort of looked at the various blobs on the page and created little animals and bits and pieces from, and then connected it all with sort of lines and dots. And it looked amazing, but it didn't make sense. So I think that's the main thing to think. You're not trying to create a beautiful painting that makes sense. We're just doodling, and it's a very mindful thing. You kind of get lost into the zone, and it's very relaxing and therapeutic. So I would highly recommend it. And as I said, just don't overthink, just enjoy the process. Now, once I'd got to this stage, I was kind of really not sure what else to do, and this was an A4 sheet. So I was kind of like, oh no, I don't want to fill it all. So in the end I didn't. I just decided to leave it where it was and cut it down and use it as is.
So thank you so much for joining me as we tried out something new. I think I have enjoyed it, but I think it takes time. It's so different to the way I normally work. It did feel really back to front and it took me a while to get to grips with. I think it's something I could really enjoy, so I want to practice more. So I'll definitely be pulling out some of those pages and trying it again. But I'm quite pleased with how they turned out. Being a crafter, I don't think I'm going to leave them like this. They no doubt will end up getting entered into a journal. I did start working on a third piece, which is kind of, it looks, I think I would say that it's at its ugly stage right now. I saw Underworld, Under the Sea sort of thing. Under the Sea, not Underworld. I saw Under the Sea, basically just with this bits here. And although I have managed to pop a fish in and a seahorse and a jellyfish and another fish there, I just think it looks quite ugly at the minute out. So I would say this is at its ugly stage. And because the watercolour, because the books are designed with watercolours, they're quite light layers. You see the pen work. I have no idea what's on this. We've got inks, we've got metallic paint, we've got all sorts, and my pen isn't standing out. I think this has the potential to look really good, but I think I actually going to need to do a lot of pencil work in. I think if I could add shadowing around here and add some pencil work, sort of lighten some of these areas, give them shades and tones, it has the potential to look really good. So if you'd like to see me finish it, it's not strictly sticking to the what reverse colouring is meant to be, but to me as a crafter, it's a starting point. There's no rules. If you want to add something else, like with this as well, I think I would quite like to have added a bit of colour to the apples, which I might do at some later date. But if it gets you started, if it sparks a little bit of inspiration, then fantastic. I think it's a fun technique that we can incorporate into the crafting that we already know and love. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. And if you would like more inspiration, then you may want to check out this art journaling playlist right here.